بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. قال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى ونفعنا الله به وبكم آمين. Welcome again to our third class of the Ikhtiyar. May Allah increase all of us in knowledge. So, Ameen. So, we're going to continue from ويعتبر نصف النهار من طلوع الفجر الثاني. So right here. Right, so just a quick review. Last time we talked about a disagreement. There was a disagreement in narration with regards to what Imam Zufar's opinion actually was. And it actually aligned with the Maliki opinion, which was good because we got to discuss the differences between madhabs and how we should approach the differences as a student of knowledge, as a Hanafi. We also talked about doing the niyyah in Ramadan up until half of the day, right? So allowing the niyyah, right, to enter into the day, right, which is where the original understanding is that that's not allowed, right? That we allowed to start the fast with an intention before the fast begins, right? So in order for the entire fast to be covered with that intention, you make the intention before the fast begins. And we saw all of the reasons, very strong reasons, and a hadith as well for why that's allowed. The next discussion is going to talk about, so you said that we can make the intention in the day, but how long are we allowed to make it up until, right? So where does that stop? Can I make the intention right before Maghrib, right? Do I have it until Dhuhr? When do it until Asr? When am I allowed to now make that intention in the day if I don't make it in the nighttime, right? So that's what this discussion today is going to talk about, as well as just in general more intention stuff, and a sick person and a traveler, as well as we're going to talk about the degrees of Fajr, which is a really important discussion. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Osama, do you wanna continue reading this?
Yeah, Bismillah.
Bismillah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ويعتبر نصف النهار من طلوع الفجر الثاني فيكون إلى الضحوة الكبرى فينوي قبلها ليكون الأكثر منويا فيكون له حكم الكل حتى لو نوى بعد ذلك لا يجوز لخلو الأكثر عن النية تغليبا للأكثر.
Nice, mashallah. So he says that when we're talking about the intention in the day, half of the day is what we look to. So we look to half of the day. And that is, so how do we calculate half the day? We look at when Fajr comes in until Maghrib. So Fajr to Maghrib, you calculate the hours and you divide it in half, into two. And that is the cutoff point, right? The cutoff point. Now, the reason why it's the cutoff point is because he says, لِيكُونَ الْأَكْثَرُ مَنْوِيًّا فَيَكُونُ لَهُ حُكْمُ الْقُدْ. So we have a ruling in Hanafi fiqh, which is that it's an usul, that the half is considered, right? It takes the place of the whole, right? It has the consideration of the whole because it means that you intended the majority, right? So the majority takes the place of the whole. This is like an important rule to understand, principle in fiqh, that the majority takes the place of the whole, right? So if the majority is not okay, the whole is not okay. If the majority is right, the whole is right. And this is gonna fit into a lot of rulings in fiqh. Maybe not all of them. It's not a universal necessarily, but it is something which we see all the time in fiqh. So in this case, when we're looking at the entire day as a whole, what's the day from Fajr to Maghrib? When we say, at least to make an intention for that day, you have to make an intention for majority of the day. right? He says, because لا يجوز لخلو الأكثر عن النية. He says that if one missed most of the day without an intention, it's as if he didn't actually, it's as if he didn't actually fast, right? Because we mentioned that a condition for the fast to be valid is that you have an intention. So it's as if he didn't intend, it's as if he didn't actually fast for the majority of the day, which is as if he didn't fast for the entirety of the day, right? So to at least guarantee that the majority of the day was indeed a fast, was indeed the act of worship, which counts for that day, it has to be done, the intention has to be done before half of the day. Half of the day. All right, so this is a pure usuli understanding, right? Looking at the hadith that we saw before, that it's allowed, but then understanding that, right, where does that stop? What's the end point for that intention? And understanding that because every act of worship needs an intention, we really are trying to hold on to majority of the day as being accepted with a real intention. That's kind of the idea, right? So to absolutely make sure that your fast is valid, because at the end of the day, no one knows whether or not their fast is accepted, right, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? You what you do is you fulfill all of the the rules, all the conditions, and then the acceptance is from Allah, right? So a lot of times in fiqh, a principle is going to be based off of us trying to guarantee to the best of our ability that it is accepted with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Are you taking the extra precaution? That's called ihtiyat. That's called ihtiyat. Right. Now, this is not a pure ihtiyati measure, but it is a measure of making sure that majority of the day has that intention. So that's why one has up until half the day. I know some people would say, like, right before Dhuhr, it's not specific to a time, it's specific to the hours of the day, right? So it could be Fajr, it could be 12 o'clock, it could be 1 o'clock, it could be 2 o'clock, right? But it depends on half the day. So you have up until half the day. After half the day, what happens? Now, if you make an intention, the fast no longer counts. So you would have to make up that fast. You have to make up that fast. And really, I mean, because we saw that the reason why this rukhsa was in place from the very beginning was that it was to avoid the difficulty of one sleeping through Fajr or one missing the time of Fajr. So that really the idea is that one makes it as soon as they wake up, right? You're trying to make it because you only didn't make it the night before because you forgot or because you slept through your alarm or because you missed Fajr, right? So that's the idea. وأما جوازه بمطلق النية.
وأما جوازه بمطلق النية وبنية النفل فلما روي عن علي وعائشة رضي الله عنهما أنهما كانا يصومان يوم الشك ويقولان لأن لأن نصوم يوما من شعبان أحب إلينا من أن نفطر يوما من رمضان. وكان صومهما بنية النفل لأنه لا يجوز بنية الفرض فلولا وقوعه عن رمضان لو ظهر اليوم من رمضان لما كان لاحترازهما فائدة ولأن الزمان متعين لصوم الفرض حتى لا يقع فيه غيره بالإجماع فمتى حصل أصل النية كفى
لوقوع
لوقوع الإمساك قربة فيقع عن رمضان لعدم المزاحمة والأفضل الصوم بنية معينة مبيتة للخروج عن الخلاف.
Very nice, mashallah. So one thing I wanted to mention that with regards to fiqh rulings, one thing that's really important if one doesn't have someone that they can review the rulings with or they can discuss it with, which is the majority of us, right? We're not in a school, we're not learning this with a bunch of other students. The best is to actually imagine yourself teaching it and how you would explain what we cover, the contents that we cover, to someone else, right? If you were to teach them. Now, I know this is in Arabic, so it might be hard if one is not very accustomed to, they can't read Arabic fluently. But the idea is that when you understand the principles, that you imagine how you would be able to break it down for someone else, right? And that's why in this class, if you ever have any questions when thinking about that, this doesn't make fundamental sense in a way that I could explain it to someone else, then inshallah, that's when a good question is warranted. So he says, وَأَمَّا جَوَازُهُ بِمُطْلَقِ النِّيَّةِ وَبِنِيَّةِ النَّفْلِ. So he says, we mentioned in the very beginning that one is able to fast Ramadan with the intention, just with a general intention, right? A normal intention to fast. Any intention, as well as making an intention, right? As well as making an intention to fast a nafil fast, right? So if one makes the intention to fast a nafil fast, or actually any other fast, even another wajib, as long as it's not fard, right? So another wajib fast, it actually counts for Ramadan, right? So if I say I want to make right now, I intend to make up a makeup fast from last Ramadan. Does it count for the makeup or for Ramadan? It actually counts for Ramadan. And he's going to explain why. So he says the immediate reason is that there's a hadith narrated from Aisha, from Ali, and Aisha radiallahu anhuma, that they used to fast the day of Shak. They used to fast the 29th of Sha'ban, right? The day, so they didn't see the moon and they fasted that next day. And they used to say, for us to fast a day of Sha'ban is more beloved to us, ahabbu ilayna, than that we miss a day of Ramadan, right? That we break our fast on the day of Ramadan. Right? وَكَانَ صَوْمُهُمَا بِنِيَّةِ النَّفْلِ. Right? So he says that, our fast counting as an extra day of Sha'ban is better for us than missing a day of Ramadan. And their intention for fasting that day was with the intention of a nafil. Right? The reason why is because it's actually haram, we mentioned this, or makruh tahriman actually, to fast the day of Shak with the intention of it being Ramadan, because it's not Ramadan. Right? You have not established that it's Ramadan, so to fast that day with the intention of it actually being Ramadan is actually sinful. So it's clearly that they didn't do that. They had the intention of a nafil, right? So he said that if it actually didn't count for Ramadan, right? So if the day actually was Ramadan, then there would be no benefit in them doing this, right? In them saying, we don't want to miss Ramadan. If it didn't count for Ramadan, if it actually happened to be Ramadan, because they had an intention of a nafil fast, they wouldn't do this. There'd be no point in them doing this, right? So it clearly shows that it did count if it was Ramadan with the intention of a nafil fast, right? As well as the aspect that we mentioned at the time is specific to the fast of Ramadan. And that's why, according to ijma' of the scholars, nothing else can be fasted during Ramadan, right? So we have three proofs here, right? We have the first proof is that the logical proof, which is that Ramadan is specific. It's a specific obligation to fast the month of Ramadan, i.e., the day of Ramadan needs a fast, right? It's obligatory on each specific day. And one cannot fast two different fasts on one day. So because the day is specific to Ramadan, only Ramadan counts for it. That's number one. Second proof is that we have a hadith. And the hadith is clear that they knew that they were able to fast Ramadan with the intention of a nafil fast. And the third is that there's ijma' that inside Ramadan, no other fast counts. So that means that because they made that intention from the hadith, right, it clearly shows that they knew that it would count for Ramadan if it actually happened to be Ramadan. So he says that as soon as one has just the intention to fast, i.e., the act of worship, which is fasting, it counts for the fast of Ramadan, right? وَالْأَفْضَلُ الصَّوْمُ بِنِيَّةِ الْمِنَ. Yeah, but he said that it's of course better, right, to have an intention which is specific to Ramadan and is before Fajr. So it's best to have an intention from the night that is specific to Ramadan, لِلْخُرُوجِ مِنَ الْخِلَافِ, to avoid disagreement. And that's the principle. Whenever we can avoid the disagreement between the madhabs, we should try. Because in reality, according to majority opinion, is that one of them's right, because they're contradictory to each other, right? So it's either counts in the in the day or it doesn't, right? So to avoid the possibility that the other madhab is actually correct, you should always try and avoid the khilaf, the disagreement between the madhab, right? And that's why, and sometimes it does make it a bit more difficult, but it's something, it's an aspect of taqwa which isn't necessary, but it is something that one will do to protect their faith, right, at a very high level, right? So this is something that mostly only the scholars do, people who have actually studied different madhabs and who also have a very high level of taqwa, right? Or those who have studied, or even students of knowledge who have studied enough to know the differences, right? So, but it's not easy, it's not obligatory to do this, right? But it is best to do so, right? So that is why we're able to make an intention, any intention to fast for Ramadan during Ramadan, and it counts. It counts for Ramadan, right? So someone says, man, you know what, I want, I made the intention for Nafil. I forgot that it was Ramadan. It's okay, right? It counted. You don't have to make up that day. You're good. Any questions about that or the previous one? Alhamdulillah. So usually every class starts off with a bunch of students, and then everyone kind of falls off except for just a couple. So, alhamdulillah, now that there are less students, we can open it up for more discussion in class, inshallah. So feel free to ask questions as long as it's related, of course, to the subject matter and what we're actually talking about, because we're going to cover everything, inshallah. So, go ahead, Hassan, please.
بسم الله. قال والنفل يجوز بنية من النهار لحديث عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا أصبح دخل على نسائه وقال هل عندكن شيء فإن قلن لا قال إني إذا لصائم. قال ويجوز صوم رمضان بنية واجب آخر لما مر في مطلق النية ونية النفل. قال وباقي الصوم لا يجوز إلا بنية معينة من الليل لأن الوقت يصلح له ولغيره فيحتاج إلى التعيين والتبييت قطعا للمزاحمة.
Right, mashallah. So a couple different points here. So he says that the Nafil fast, this isn't really specific to Ramadan, so we're gonna go through this quickly. The Nafil fast is permissible with an intention in the day. So we said that, remember, the original is that you need an intention in the night. So why are you now saying that you can make an intention in the day for Nafil fast? I get Ramadan, but Nafil fast doesn't make sense. The reason why is because there's a hadith from Aisha radiallahu anha where she said the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he used to, when he woke up, he would come to his wives and say, do you have anything to eat? Is there anything to eat for today? If they said no, because the Prophet they rarely had, right, food, right? The Prophet used to give away everything, right, every night, and sometimes they wouldn't have food the next day. The Prophet, if they said no, then he would say, okay, then I'm fasting, right? Okay, I'm fasting then, right? So he would make an intention clearly in the day, right, after he found out that there was no food. And this is just a clear hadith. This is why we break away from the asl, right, because of this clear hadith that is narrated in Sahih Muslim, right? So it's a clear exception from the rule. He also says that Ramadan can also be fasted with the intention of another mandatory fast, another wajib fast. And this is, I already kind of mentioned this, but this is the same idea of the general intention as well as the nafil intention in the day, right? It falls into the same category because nothing else can be fasted in that time, right? It's specific to Ramadan, right? Um, he says, وَبَاقِ الصَّوْمِ لَا يَجُوزُ إِلَّا بِنِيَّةٍ مُعْيَنَةٍ. He said, but every other fast outside of Ramadan, right? So if you're fasting outside of Ramadan, right? These only count, right? So not nafil and outside of Ramadan. So we're talking about like a makeup fast. We're talking about a vowed fast, right? Those are really the only two. Outside of Ramadan, they can only be fasted within specific intention before the day begins, right? So this is the actual original ruling. The original understanding is that you need an intention that's specific to that day before the day starts, right? And the reason why is because that day is not specific to that fast. You could fast that day, one nafil fast. You could do nafil, you could do a wajib, you could do anything. You could even not fast. So because there's no specific uh, time frame for this fast, it can happen on any other day. You have to make it. You have to specify it, right? And the real reason behind this is that there's no difficulty, right? There's no difficulty in just fasting another day, right? So, for example, I have to make up a fast. I have my whole life to make up my fast. Okay, for I wanted to make it up on Monday. Oops, I overslept. Fajr. I didn't make the intention. Is there really a problem? I can just make it up tomorrow or the day after or a year later or 20 years later. You have your entire life. So because now there is no difficulty in missing an intention, there no longer is a need for a rukhsa. So the rukhsa falls away, right? The rukhsa, right, is there because of the need. When there's no longer a need, there's no longer a rukhsa, right? When one's traveling, they are now able, because of the difficulty of travel, to combine prayers in Shafi'i, for example, right? Or to shorten their prayers. Just to say, keep it Hanafi. As soon as there's no longer that difficulty, they can't, right? So that's why. And he says that ta'yin with tabit qatan al-muzahama, right? So and the specific why you have to specify it is because otherwise you don't know what you're fasting, right? Because you're able to fast a voluntary fast, a nafil fast, you're able to fast a mandatory, right? Any of these fasts, because you don't know which one it actually is, you have to specify it. So that's why in Ramadan, because it's specific to Ramadan, you don't have to specify it. But outside of Ramadan, you do, because then you have no idea what you're actually fasting, right? You can't just say, I intend to fast. And then you fast the whole day. And then you're like, oh, well, it counts for nafil. Or actually, I want it to count for wajib. It could be either one, right? So just like you have to specify the prayer, you also have to specify this act of worship, right? Because it could have been any one of those. Whereas Ramadan, it can't. Ramadan, if you fast, it's only happening because Ramadan, that time is specific to Ramadan. So that's just a quick thing about nafil fast as well as wajib fast. So I did, it's not specific to Ramadan, but it's important to know. So now we're going to get onto a good discussion. And this is something that most people don't actually, they never see this ruling because it's not that important for someone in fasting Ramadan, but it does actually have some practical usage. So we're going to see this disagreement between Abu Hanifa and his two companions, Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad. So Bismillah. So
قال والمريض والمسافر في رمضان إن نوى واجبا آخر وقع عنه وإلا وقع عن رمضان. وقال يقع عن رمضان فيهما لأن الرخصة لا يحتمل تضرره وعجزه، فإذا صام انتفى ذلك فصار كالصحيح المقيم. وله أن أن الشارع رخص له ليصرفه إلى ما هو الأهم عنده من الصوم والفطر، فصار كالشعبان في حق غيره. فلما نوى واجبا آخر علمنا أنه الأهم عنده فيقع عنه.
There you go.
وقيل
Perfect. Jazakallah khair. So he says, now this is an interesting ruling. So the sick person and the traveler in Ramadan, if they make the intention for another or mandatory fast, it counts for the other mandatory fast. So what does this mean? Someone is sick, they have the option now to fast Ramadan or not to fast, right? And what we mean by sickness here is not a sickness which is, and we're going to actually see this is a really important daqiq point. We're talking about a sickness that shows, and we'll see this later on as well, that one, if they do fast, their sickness will increase. So there are two types of sicknesses that allow you to break your fast. One, that you genuinely cannot fast. You literally will die if you fast, right? And the second is that you're afraid that if you fast, your sickness will get worse, right? So that's like someone has a horrible, you know, thing that they need to drink water all the time, something like that, right? So right now they're stable, but they know that if they fast, right, they're gonna lose that stability of their health. They're gonna decline. So they can break their fast. So they have that choice. The same thing with someone who is traveling. They have the option to fast or not to fast, right? So that's what they're talking about here. So he says that if one of those people in that case, if they make the intention to fast another obligatory fast, so they say, and today I'm gonna fast, a makeup fast from last year. It actually counts for that makeup fast. It doesn't count for Ramadan, right? Now, why? Now this is going to get to a big discussion. Right? We're going to say why. And the other two Sahibin, Abu Yusuf and Muhammad, they say, no. It only counts for Ramadan, right? So we have Abu Hanifa saying it counts for the other wajib, and the Sahibin saying it only counts for Ramadan if they actually fast that day, right? So the first thing they're going to mention is the Sahibin's proof. So they say, the rukhsa lihtimali tadarrurihi wa ajzihi. It says that the rukhsa, as we mentioned earlier, right, it's nice, is only because it might harm him or because he's unable to. So if he fasts, it's clear that there's no longer that harm. There's no longer that inability. So he's as if he's someone who is healthy and at his house, at his home, not traveling, because he chose to fast, right? So as soon as you chose to fast, you now have shown that there's no longer is a disability. So why would it count for that other mandatory fast? It won't. You're like anyone else fasting. You chose to fast. So because of that, it counts for Ramadan. It doesn't count for anything else because the time is specific to Ramadan. So that makes a lot of sense, right? That's a really clear proof. And this is why this is like when you look at the different opinions, you read one and you understand it, like, man, that's clear. Like, how could anyone disagree with that? And then you hear another the Imam's opinion, and you're like, wait, that's even stronger. And you go back and forth, and that shows the strength of these great Imams, right? It's really hard to kind of pick an opinion. So Abu Hanifa says, though, he responds, he says, Ash-Shari', the one who legislated these rulings, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, أرخص له ليصرفه إلى ما هو الأهم عنده من الصوم والفطر. He has given him the permission to choose what is more important to him, right? So what is a rukhsa in this case, right? In this case, when someone's traveling, he actually has a choice. No one's saying he's forced not to fast, right? So we're not talking about the person who's so sick he's going to die. He can't fast, right? We're talking about the person who has a choice. So I'm traveling. I have the choice to fast or not. It's literally my own choice. So the real rukhsa here is not fasting. The real rukhsa here is the choice. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the choice to choose what is more important to him in that moment, fasting or breaking his fast. So in reality, he's not like a normal person at his home. He's like someone in Sha'ban. He's like someone in some other month in the year. He has the choice to fast it or not, right? Today's Sha'ban. I can fast today or I can choose not to. There's nothing telling me to fast it or not, right? فلما نوى واجبا آخر علمنا أنه لا هم عنده فيقع عنه. So he says, so when he intends a different obligatory fast, it's clear that that was what was more important to him. So it counts for that mandatory fast. He has the option to choose to fast or not to fast. He has the option to choose what's more important to him. So because he chose a different obligatory fast, it's mandatory upon him, it's another obligation that has to get done. He has the ability to do so. Because if he so wanted, he doesn't have to fast. So we no longer can say that Ramadan is specific to him, the time zone is specific to Ramadan. Because in Ramadan, one can't just choose not to fast. You're never able to just do so. So because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the ability to not fast, he can fast whatever he wants. Right? So that's Imam Abu Hanifa's that's his opinion, right? So you have the Sahibain, they have their strong proofs, and you have Abu Hanifa, and he has a strong proofs. And this all comes from really, really, really deep thinking. A very bright mind, anhu, and extremely deep thinking into these rulings. So when people come and they say, oh, Abu Hanifa is going against, these people, they just completely went against the hadith and they just ruined, fiqh, they ruined the hadith, they ruined what the Prophet said. It's like, you actually don't know who you're talking about. Right? You're talking about the greatest minds in Muslim history, right? Who had access to all of the sources there. They met Sahabas and they were extremely smart and very, very detailed in their understanding. They weren't just saying stuff just because it made sense. They were breaking it down and having these deep discussions, and that's where we get this madhab from. So before we continue, does everyone understand the difference of agreement?
Yeah, I think so. I actually had a question. So, but this applies only to other obligatory fasts, right? Like a makeup fast, for example, right?
So you're about to see a bit more. So that's a good
Okay.
good question, inshallah.
Okay.
So Osama, which one are you leaning towards more? What kind of resonates with you more?
Um, I to me the Sahibain makes more sense
Okay.
upon my first impressions.
Mhm. Nice, mashallah. What about you, Muhammad? What are you leaning towards?
I'm always with Imam Abu Hanifa, Sheikh.
Mashallah. See, we already have a disagreement in our class itself, mashallah. And that just shows everyone will look at something differently. And you guys are both correct, mashallah, because they're both valid opinions. Alhamdulillah. So let's continue. Let's continue with this. Go ahead. وقيل
وقيل الأصح عند أبي حنيفة أن رمضان إذا نوى واجبا آخر يقع عن رمضان لأن إباحة الفطر للعجز فإذا قدر فهو كالصحيح بخلاف المسافر والأول رواية الكرخي رضي الله عنه رحمه الله وعن أبي حنيفة رضي الله عنه في النفل روايتان فمن قال يقع عن رمضان فلأنه لم يصرفه في الأهم لأن الخروج عن العهدة أهم من النفل بخلاف واجب آخر فإن كل واحد منهما خروج عن العهدة ومن قال يقع نفلا فلأنه لما كان مخيرا فله أن يصرفه إلى ما شاء.
Very nice, mashallah. So the first thing he mentioned is that there's another, he says waqila. Whenever we see waqila, this is an important thing in books. It's called sigatu tamrid, which means that it's a weaker opinion. Waqila. It's in the passive voice. So you're not actually mentioning who said this. You're just saying it's also been said, so on, right? So he said, and it's also been said that the actual opinion according to Abu Hanifa is that the sick person, if he intends a different obligation, it actually counts for Ramadan, because the ability, the rukhsa was because he wasn't able to fast, and now if he is able to fast, he's like someone who is healthy, so it counts for Ramadan. But he says that this is only for, right? So it's the same thing as the Sahibain, except for that that this other opinion maintains that he has the ability for it to count for Ramadan if he's a traveler. So he said that there's a difference. Actually, another opinion about Abu Hanifa is that he agrees with the Sahibain if the person is sick, and he disagrees with him if the person is a traveler. Now, as I mentioned, this is a weaker opinion, so we don't really have to actually look towards it as much. And it just it's just another narration, right? So which one is it? Allahu A'lam, but what the Imam is saying in this book is that it's not the Mu'tamad of Abu Hanifa, is that in that his actual opinion, and this is actually going to be strengthened by what we see right now, is that it counts for the other wajib for both cases. And he says that this first narration is from Karqi, which is going to be a more reliable narration from Imam al-Karqi radiallahu anhu. Well, as I mentioned, he passed away 952. So Abu Hanifa, actually not 350, I think it's 352. I think I messed up that date. I have to check that again. So he says that وعن أبي حنيفة رضي الله عنه, according to the Nafil, this is what Usama asked, there are two opinions. He says that there are two opinions for the Nafil, and we can kind of already guess what they're going to be. So he says, whoever says that it counts for Ramadan, i.e. doesn't count for the Nafil, it only counts for Ramadan, the reason why is because he didn't actually put it towards what's more important. So he's saying, you know what, I get that you have the ability to choose what's more important, but clearly, right, he says, al-khuruj min al-uhda ahammu min nafl, right? Removing oneself from the obligation of Ramadan, i.e. from that responsibility of fasting Ramadan, is clearly more important than just a nafil. So you don't have the choice to just choose a nafil, because it can't be more important than fasting Ramadan. It can't be more important than fasting Ramadan, right? But he says that's different than another wajib, because another obligation, right? They're both obligatory upon him, right? Like I have to fast this Ramadan. I also have to fast the last Ramadan fast that I missed. So they're equal. That's one opinion. And he said that the second opinion of Abu Hanifa is that it actually counts for the nafil too. It counts for the nafil as well. So if I'm traveling and I make the intention to fast a nafil fast, it actually counts for the nafil. It doesn't count for Ramadan. And the reason why is he says that because he was given complete ability to choose whatever he wants, he can intend to fast any fast he wants. And that's kind of the weaker opinion, right? So, he can choose, the other opinion is clearly a bit stronger. Now, what the actually imams say about this, we'll need more research, but the idea is that there are two opinions with regards to the nafil. One that says that it counts for the nafil, and one that kind of aligns with what the Sahibin had said about the wajib, is that it only counts for Ramadan, right? And that kind of aligns with his actual first line of reasoning, which is that he actually gets to choose what's more important. So, a nafil is not as important as another wajib. And this also strengthens the first opinion. Why? Because it shows that if there is a narration that says that he can choose to fast, a nafil, and it counts for a nafil, then clearly the opinion that says that he has the ability to fast a wajib, right, is strong, right? So and even the opinion that says that it doesn't count for the nafil also approves that, because it says that in the wajib, he says that in the wajib situation, it counts because they're equal. They're on equal terms, i.e. the wajib and the Ramadan is on an equal playing field, you could say. So because of that, he has a choice between the two of them. So this other narration strengthens the first narration, which is that Abu Hanifa allows the fast of a different mandatory fast besides Ramadan when one is traveling or they are sick, and they have the choice to do either one, and it counts for that wajib and not for Ramadan itself. So we just seen kind of like this whole, so that's the answer to your question, Osama. And we've seen this whole discussion between, Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad, Imam Malik. Now remember, the mu'tamad is always going to be Abu Hanifa, except for in specific cases, right? The relied upon opinion is always going to be Abu Hanifa in majority of the cases, right? But because this is mentioned, both of them are valid opinions that one can take. And this will depend on one's circumstances, right? One's traveling and they want to make up a fast, they can, right? And it gives that, flexibility, right? And they're following the Imam's opinion that it will count for another makeup fast. So what we gain from this is the deep thought process of the Imams, as well as just a good nuanced understanding about traveling when one's fasting. So a lot of times people don't know this, that if you do choose to fast, you can actually make up a different fast. It doesn't only count for Ramadan, right? And there's a difference, and like I said, there's a big difference of opinion here. So alhamdulillah, we learned that. And there's a couple other, this is something that's going to be discussed across madhab and delved into a lot deeper. But for now, we just gained the basic understanding. So any questions about that discussion? Okay, so Bismillah, let's continue. So ووقت الصوم من طلوع الفجر الثاني.
ووقت الصوم من طلوع الفجر الثاني إلى غروب الشمس، لقوله تعالى وكلوا واشربوا إلى قوله من الفجر. قال أبو عبيدة رضي الله عنه الخيط الأبيض الصبح الصادق، أباح الأكل والشرب إلى طلوع الفجر فيحرم عنده. وأما آخره فلقوله عليه السلام إذا أقبل الليل من ها هنا وأدبر النهار من ها هنا أفطر الصائم، أكل أو لم يأكل.
Very nice, mashallah. So now we're getting on to a new masala, which is that the time of fasting is from the second fajr, sorry, the second dawn, the true dawn, until the setting of the sun. This is from the ayah, which is kulu washrabu hatta yatabayyana, and eat and drink until it becomes clear to you, a distinct, the white line, right, from the black line of dawn. Right, you start to see a clear whiteness that they says that al-mu'tarad al-mumtadda fil ufuq, that spreads across the horizon as you go. And that's what true dawn is, right? It's the actual light of the sun which begins to spread across the horizon, as opposed to false dawn, fake dawn, which is it shines a bit, right, in the above the horizon and then disappears, right, around 20 minutes before the real fajr comes in, right? So as well as Abu Ubaidah, and my book says Abu Ubaid, but it's probably Abu Ubaidah, that's correct. He says that the khayt al-abyad, the white line, thread, is the true dawn. That's what he says. And as for the end of it, so that's the beginning of fasting. The end of fasting is from the Prophet ﷺ. He mentions, this is in Bukhari and Muslim. He says that when the night comes from there, from here, right, from there, ha huna, wa adbar an-naharu min ha huna, right, and the day goes from here, aftar as-sa'im, right, the person who is fasting, right, has broken his fast. Akala aw lam yakul, whether he eats or not. So regardless whether or not he eats or not, his fast is broken, right? When, i.e., the sun sets, right? So when the sun sets, his fast is broken. So that's the clear picture of the time of fasting is. And this is something that everyone knows. But now the discussion comes is, what is Fajr, right? And this was not a pre-modern discussion, because back then, at the time of the Prophet, everyone, they went and they looked for Fajr, right? You woke up and you found Fajr, and then you gave the adhan. right? You waited until it came in and then you gave it that. So it's something that was always going to be taqribi. That changed, of course, throughout the seasons, but that's something that was always estimated. It was never 100% accurate. But now we have degrees, right? And there's a whole discussion about what degree is correct. Is it 18? Is it 15? Is it 12? Is it 6? Some people have even said that, right? So it's a long discussion. And there was a big discussion about whether or not, right, we can choose a fixed degree, right? And there have been some really good articles. Sheikh Noor actually wrote a good article about this. I can post it if anyone is interested. But I wanted to just share this picture. So this is, you guys can kind of see this. These are the degrees, right? So for someone who hasn't seen this before, these are the degrees. So we have the horizon, this is day, and sunrise is going to be right here around civil twilight. And this is the night. Right? So as the sun moves, you get this degree. And the 18th degree, anything below 18th degree, is astronomical dawn. These are technical terms. They have their own meanings. They're not that important. 12 degrees is nautical dawn. That refers to sailors and when they're first able to actually distinguish, key landmarks or the route, right, of the ocean. And then you have civil dawn around at 6. So this is kind of how the degrees works, right? So the higher the degree, the darker the sky. So when does Fajr actually come in? Now, as I mentioned, there's a lot of disagreement about this, but I want to just read this paragraph from this article that has been written about this, and it kind of just nails the point on the head. So it says, decades of research conducted by organizations such as moonsighting.com, as well as several other individuals, have revealed that the timings for Fajr and Isha are not scientifically deterministic and vary with season, latitude, elevation, and other factors, right? So the idea that there's a big idea about, right, a standard degree. Everyone said, oh, it's just 18. It's just 15. That's actually not correct because it varies depending on these factors. Due to repeated inquiries sent to the Fifth Council of North America and the Islamic Society of North America, 2 sessions were held to discuss the topic in 2016-2017. The conclusion from these meetings was that since none of the calculation methods are entirely accurate for all locations across North America, an approximation must be made to ease the burden on Muslims from having to visually observe twilight and dusk on a regular basis. So they said that we have to just make an approximation. And that's why every, Muslim, you could say council or just, country, or even imam, a group, like a community, they'll do their own ijtihad. So it's something that is purely ijtihadi based, that every community will actually find out when Fajr actually comes in. When looking at this, when does the actual light begin to truly appear? Is it 18 degrees? Is it 15 degrees? What degrees is it actually at? When you can actually see the light on the horizon, it becomes visible, right? And depending on the ijtihad, that's the one we'll follow. Right? It's actually a bit easier just to, look for the sun, right? But to make it easier, they're trying to find a degree that they can follow. So, right, in North America, right, they said that the consensus is around 15 degrees. 15 degrees is a consensus, while in the UK, for example, and Europe, 18 degrees is the standard degree. Right? This is Sheikh Nu kind of discusses this a lot in his article. Now, what's really important though about the degrees is not the specific degree, but the aspect of taqwa that one should have when stopping eating, right? So the idea is that the goal is not to dogmatically choose a degree to stick by, but to be precautious regardless of the case. So even if it is 15 degrees, one should stop eating by 18, right? Because the goal is that our only intention, our main focus is making sure that our fast is valid, right? It's not about cramming in the extra couple bites before Fajr comes in, right? It's not about that. The goal is to make sure that our worship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He has made obligatory upon us is accepted by Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that can only be done by having taqwa. And taqwa, as we mentioned earlier, ikhtiyar, is avoiding the gray areas of acceptance or unacceptance, right? By being cautious, right? So the goal is that, you know, regardless whether or not whatever, you know, committee or discussion they've come up to always give a buffer zone, give a 15 to 20 minute time frame before Fajr comes in to stop eating, at least 10 minutes to make sure that your fast is valid, right? And that just means waking up a bit earlier and having a light suhoor, right? And not overdoing it at suhoor anyways, right? So this is really that's kind of the importance of this discussion. And for anyone looking for a degree, there are different apps you can use, but to look at the standard for your region and to go based off of that standard. And as I mentioned, the standard for the you know, the northern hemisphere, the North America is going to be 15 degrees, and the standard for Europe, right, is going to be around 18 degrees, inshallah. So that's kind of like a basic understanding. And for other time zones and areas, you'll have to look that up, inshallah, according to the calculations provided by the local mosque or by the community that does this research, inshallah. Alhamdulillah. So what we gained from that discussion was, you know, just an analysis of when Fajr begins and until the sun sets, right? The sun sets. And usually the sunset's going to be around 2 degrees less than the time for Fajr. So sunset's going to be around it's going to be for Fajr, it's going to be 13. And for Isha, I believe it's going to be around 17 when Maghrib's usually around in 19. If you're going purely off of this. But in general, you know, sunset's a bit easier because you just really make sure that you really can just make sure that the time zone has come in by just waiting till it's dark. Whereas Fajr, you have to be extra careful because you're kind of waiting until the light shows. And as soon as the light shows, Fajr's in. So you really have to give that buffer zone. Whereas Maghrib, you just kind of wait until it just becomes dark, and then you eat. You can wait an extra 5 minutes. Whereas Fajr, you have to be precautious, right? Because as we're going to see later on, if one eats past Fajr unintentionally, their fast is broken, right? Their fast is broken, but they do not have to pay an expiation, inshallah. We're going to see that in the chapter, the section of expiations and forgetful eating and all of that, inshallah. So last paragraph, we're going to finish with the last 5 minutes. So this is just very simple. Go ahead.
قال وهو الإمساك عن الأكل والشرب والجماع مع النية بشرط الطهارة عن الحيض والنفاس، لما تقدم أن الصوم هو الإمساك لغة، زدنا عليه النية ليقع قربة على ما قدمناه، والطهارة من الحيض والنفاس ليتحقق الأداء في حق المرأة، وتمامه مر في الحيض، والنية أن يعلم بقلبه أنه يصوم وقد مر.
Great. So he says, and what is fasting? Fasting is to do imsak, right? To avoid, to refrain from eating, drinking, and having sexual intercourse with any intention to fast. Bishart al-tahara, with the condition of being in a state of major ritual impurity from menstruation and postnatal bleeding, right? So that's the condition. So a woman on their period or in nifas cannot fast, right? It's haram to them for them to fast, but they have to make it up, right? Whereas for prayer, the prayer is not actually obligatory upon them, right? They actually don't have to pray during that time, whereas fast they do, but they can't, right? So he says, because we mentioned that fasting is simply imsak, is to refrain from something linguistically, and we mentioned the intention in order for it to be an act of worship, and that the fast and that the purity for the woman is that it actually counts, right? It's something which is it actually counts for them instead of it not counting, because it won't count if they are in that state of ritual impurity, and the rest of that has been mentioned in the period, in the chapter of menstruation. So we can return back to that chapter. The idea is they just can't fast, right? It's been made clearly impermissible for them to fast, but they have to make it up. When he says, like, kind of restates this, that the intention is to know in one's heart that they are fasting, right? And we already saw this. So not that they say it with their tongue, but that they actually just know that they are fasting the next day. So what do we mean by a good intention? A good intention is to know that tomorrow in the nighttime, you make this intention, tomorrow I am going to fast Ramadan. You know this in your subconscious, in your head, right? That's what a good intention is, right? That it's something that happened before Fajr and it's specific. We don't mean by specific that you say it, right? Or you write it down, right? It just has to be known to oneself, inshallah. So we're going to stop here for today. The next chapter will be looking for the moon, which is perfect because we're going to be looking for the moon in almost a week, in around a week, inshallah. So that's going to be good for next week. And then we're going to talk about bearing witness that one saw it, if there's things in the sky that block the sight of the moon. And then we're going to talk about what breaks one's fast, right? So that we're going to have a discussion about what breaks one's fast, and then we're going to have a discussion about kafara, expiations, and then what doesn't break one's fast, and then what is makruh for someone to do while they're fasting, and then ittikaf. So there's a good amount left, alhamdulillah. It'll definitely probably go still through Ramadan, but we'll have that discussion next week, inshallah, about whether or not to continue, inshallah. Any final questions? So we'll stop the class here. Any final questions about what we went over today? All right, alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair, Salma, for reading again, mashallah. And I'll see you guys next week.
Inshallah. I had a question, but it was like sort of unrelated.
Okay.
I don't know.
I can pause. Okay, I'll pause the recording here. And then we'll leave it open for open discussion.